What's going on, everybody? CoolieBizTech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the Motorola Moto G 2026. Now, this phone just came out last month, and I don't think as of right now it's really available anywhere. But I imagine throughout 2026, this phone just came out, so I'm sure in a couple months, it will probably be available at most US carriers. Now, this phone is the successor to, I believe, the Moto G 5G. It's basically the same thing from what I can see so far. But at this point, they just dropped the 5G from the name because apparently in 2026, 5G is more or less an expectation. Now with this phone, we are getting a really large 6.7-inch display. It is an IPS LCD, so typical Motorola display. Now, unfortunately, we are only getting a resolution of 1604 by 720, so basically just 720p, and a PPI of 262. So despite the display being really large, the image quality is maybe not really the best. Now, in my experience using the phone so far, I did do a whole playthrough of Knights of the Old Republic. If you know, you know. And honestly, I didn't really have a bad experience. Now, granted, I guess that game is not really the best example considering it came out in 2001 or something. But the point is, if you're really doing a lot of stuff that relies on visual quality, then in that case, you're probably going to be a little disappointed here depending on what your actual expectations are. But for casual users, if you're doing stuff like playing more basic or, in my case, really old games, or maybe watching YouTube or using social media every now and then, it still should be okay. But again, if you are more of a heavy mobile gamer and you really like those bright, intense graphics and sharp image quality and stuff like that, then yeah, in that case, you are, of course, going to be disappointed. But considering this phone is $199 factory unlocked, it's not like it's a super high-end device or anything, so definitely keep that in mind. But again, we are getting a really large display here. It is 6.7 inches once again, and we do have a 20:9 aspect ratio. And also keep in mind, this phone does have a 120 Hz refresh rate, so I don't know that you can really tell here, but the movement on the screen is going to be a bit faster and smoother, so it's going to give you more of a fluid premium experience. Now at this point in 2026, I feel like pretty much any phone is going to have a higher refresh rate than the old 60 Hz that used to be the standard. And once you really get used to it, I guess you can kind of tell, but still at the end of the day, it's not going to be a huge difference. So the bottom line here is when it comes to the display, I feel like it's on one hand kind of what you would expect from a more entry-level device, but at the same time for more casual users. So really the average person who's looking for a phone like this, I feel like it will be at least okay. Now for storage with this phone, for what it is, I do think it is pretty good. Now when it comes to storage, with the Moto G 2026, we are getting 128 gigabytes of internal storage. And also keep in mind this phone does have microSD card expansion too, which I am really happy to see. Because at this point in 2026, we are seeing fewer and fewer devices that have this. Take for example the Samsung Galaxy A36 5G. Granted, that phone is a bit higher end than this, but at that point, I feel like that's a feature you would expect in a higher end device that's more expensive. Whereas at this point, as counterintuitive as it is, when it comes to a feature like microSD card expansion or even a headphone jack for that matter, but if you are looking for a phone that has microSD card expansion, then again, keep in mind this phone does have that. So if you have, for example, lots of photos and videos that can be stored on a microSD card, and if you are coming from a phone that does have that too, then you won't have to worry about transferring everything to internal storage. So that combined with having 128 gigabytes, which granted in 2026, it's not huge, but I do feel like I want to say the average phone in this price range has, I guess 128 is pretty normal, but I have seen plenty that have only 64. So if storage is important to you, that is something to keep in mind. Now for security features with the Moto G 2026, this phone does have a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So as you can see, real fast and responsive. One more time. And one more time just for good measure. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, and despite not looking as premium as some of the ones that have it in the display, it's at least really practical, so really can't complain about that. In addition to this, we are getting Face Unlock too, so definitely nice to have both options. Now, for me personally, I feel like if there is a fingerprint scanner, I'm probably not going to touch Face Unlock. But yeah, it's based on personal preference, and more features is never a bad thing. Now for the camera setup here, up front, we got a 32 megapixel front-facing camera, so we got a real nice hole punch design here. And then with a 32 megapixel front-facing camera, the photo quality is going to be pretty nice. Now, of course, if you're taking lots of selfies, maybe you're more of a content creator or something like that, then in that case, be sure to keep your expectations here realistic, because after all, this is a phone you can get for under $200. And with a device like this, you aren't going to get necessarily the best photo quality, but at the same time, I do think that for what it is pretty good. Then on the back here, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and I think this is a depth sensing camera. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest, I couldn't find really any information on what this mysterious third lens is. I can only assume it's a depth sensing camera because this definitely doesn't have an ultra wide, which is kind of too bad. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it does really have all the basics. And then for video, we do have a max recording quality of 1080p at 30 frames per second. So no 4K or anything like that. But I mean, I feel like no one was really expecting that from this phone anyway, so it's all good. But in general, I feel like the photo quality here is at least halfway decent. I mean, it is an entry-level phone after all, but you're not getting a bad camera here. It doesn't have a ton of features, but with the features it does have, if you are more of a casual user and you're just taking basic photos every now and then, I do think it will be good enough. And then I do appreciate that we do get a macro camera here, so you can get those nice close-up images. And in my limited experience using this phone so far, I mean, this is the first time I've even picked it up. I would say the macro camera does look pretty nice, so I don't really have too many complaints here. Now to give you an idea of what the camera interface actually looks like, here it is. So pretty basic. If you're more familiar with Motorola devices, you will feel pretty at home here. Now, if we go to the settings, I can see right away there's really not a whole lot here. Now, I will be having dedicated videos for these features, but for this, suffice to say, on one hand, it really has all the basics, but on the other hand, I mean, compare the features you're seeing here to your current device. I personally feel like even for an entry-level phone, it is kind of lacking. I mean, it doesn't even, does it? No, it doesn't even have fun mode unless this is fun mode. I guess not, but the bottom line here is if you are looking for a phone that has a decent camera for more basic use, then I do think this phone will at least get the job done. But if you are expecting more features and more fancy things in general, then most likely you will be disappointed here. Now for the processor, with the Moto G 2026, we are getting 4 GB of RAM, so not too terribly much. And we are getting the MediaTek Dimensity 6300 processor. So I will say the processor isn't the greatest. Now keep in mind again, despite not saying 5G in the name, the Moto G 2026 is in fact a 5G device, so there is that. I remember just a couple years ago there were phones that were going for the same near $200 price range that were only 4G, so I am glad to see that the average entry-level phone is still a 5G phone now. But at the same time, it's not really the fastest. I mean, even when I'm just scrolling through this, not really doing a whole lot, it is kind of laggy, so make of that what you will. Obviously, when you're actually using the phone and doing stuff like making calls, sending text messages, things like that, it will be at least decently fine. But if you are doing stuff like playing more of a modern game like Fortnite, for example, with that kind of use, especially for something that requires more of a connection, then it will probably lag a bit. So if you are more of a heavy user, definitely keep this in mind. But I do think for somebody who's looking for maybe an upgrade from an older non-5G phone, but you still really don't need a ton, in that kind of situation, it will be okay. But again, if you are a heavy user, maybe you're coming from like an older flagship phone or something like that. If that is you and you want a similar level of performance, I would recommend considering a higher end device. Now, I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the scores I got. So what I do recommend is running this test on your current device and then comparing your scores to these, because after all, you are going to want something to compare it to know whether or not your phone is going to be faster than this or slower than this. But in general, from what I've personally seen on all the phones that I've used, with a single core score of 786 and a multi-core score of 1929, I do think that it is at least decent. But again, at this point, by 2026 standards, it's by far not the best. So remember, this is an entry-level phone, so don't get an entry-level phone expecting mid-range or higher-end performance. But like pretty much everything else with this device, for more basic use, it will at least get the job done. Now, despite pretty much everything about this phone, in my opinion, being honestly kind of mid, one area that is really impressive is the battery. Now with this phone, we're getting a 5200 milliamp hour battery that supports 30-watt fast charging, so even when you compare it to phones that are much higher end than this, that is really impressive. In fact, for comparison, my iPhone 15 Pro Max doesn't last nearly as long as this phone's battery. Now, granted, I am a really heavy user and I've had my iPhone 15 Pro Max since that phone came out in like 2023. So I guess it's not really a fair comparison, but in general, the point here is if you are really concerned about battery life, maybe you're in a situation where you're not always around a charger, like you're traveling a lot, or maybe whatever you're doing for work requires you to be a bit more active and out and about. Whatever the case may be, if battery life is really important to you, then the Moto G 2026 will be a great choice because with a 5200 milliamp hour battery, not only do you get a ton of battery life here, but also down the road as the battery wears out, you're not going to notice it nearly as long as you do with a much smaller battery. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a while without having to replace it, then the Moto G 2026 will be a great choice. And then with 30-watt fast charging, while this phone doesn't come with a wall adapter, if you do have a 30-watt fast charger, then the charging speed on this phone is going to be real good. And compared to other phones in this price range, 30-watt fast charging is really impressive. But keep in mind, in case you're expecting it, unfortunately the Moto G 2026 does not have wireless charging, so you're kind of out of luck there, but that's never really been a common feature anyway. I mean, for higher end phones, sure, but for lower end phones, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 phones that have it, so definitely not really an expectation. Now on the topic of longevity, when it comes to the software, on one hand, this phone does have Android 16, which is great, but keep in mind, in case you're new to Motorola, they're not really known for having the best software support. Now, to be fair, I have seen it getting better over the years, but if you do want the latest version of Android as it comes out, then I would probably go with Samsung instead. But still, having the newest software is a good thing. And in addition to this, we are getting NFC with this phone too, so if you like to use tap and pay, then you won't have to worry about that here. Now, taking a closer look at the device itself, again, we are getting a nice, sleek, modern look here. On the left side here, we got the slot for the SIM card and the microSD card. Again, keep in mind this phone does actually have microSD card expansion, so real nice to see there. On the bottom, we got the headphone jack, microphone, USB-C port, and the speaker. On the right side, we got the volume keys right here, and then the power key, which also doubles as the fingerprint scanner. On the top, we got the noise canceling microphone, and on the back, we got the camera setup, flash, Motorola logo right here, and the back is made of this kind of rubbery, sticky-ish material, which I personally feel like it has a nice, slightly more premium texture to it. Better than a solid plastic in my opinion. But speaking of plastic, the entire frame is made of plastic, so not really surprising, but just keep that in mind. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but the viewing angles on this phone are surprisingly good. With a regular IPS LCD, it's typically not going to be this good, so I am impressed by this. The phone also has a surprisingly decent amount of weight to it, so although, again, it is made pretty much entirely of plastic, it definitely doesn't feel cheap. But in conclusion, my overall first impressions of the Motorola Moto G 2026. Now, in general, compared to other versions of this phone that I've seen in the past, it's not altogether that different. So if you have like a Moto G 5G from a couple years ago, I personally feel like you can probably do better if you're thinking about upgrading, because sure, it does have Android 16, so the latest version of Android, and I don't have a Moto G 5G, so I don't know if the software support is actually that bad, but I'm guessing that it's not going to update to Android 16, so if that's what you're after and that's pretty much it, then I guess go for it. But if you do have more of an entry-level device and you're looking for something that's a bit more of an upgrade, then as much as I want to say this phone is a good choice, so far from what I've seen, I mean, again, I don't dislike it. For what it is, I do think it does do its job pretty well, but at the same time, I can't really imagine going from the average modern smartphone to this and calling it that much of an upgrade. So if you are in that kind of situation where you have a decent phone already, but you're thinking about getting something new, then I would say maybe wait a little while because Motorola is going to be rolling out their other 2026 phones pretty soon, and from what I've heard, those ones do seem pretty promising. But if you are really just looking for a basic entry-level device, then in general, this phone will at least get the job done. But keep in mind, as of now, I haven't seen it being offered anywhere except through Motorola itself. Now, by the time you're watching this video, this could completely change, but I don't really think it's worth paying $200 for. I only did it for these videos. So if that is kind of your situation, I would probably not do it quite yet. So definitely keep that in mind. But if by the time you're watching this, it's offered by your carrier for free or maybe like $50 or something like that, then I do think it's really not a bad choice. But I just don't really think there's anything super impressive about it so far. Now, keep in mind, again, this is really just my first impressions, and I will be making plenty of videos about this in the near future, so if you want to see more, definitely hit that subscribe button because I will be making a lot more about this phone real soon. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And as always, I will see you in the next video.